Mike, one of the things I wanted to talk about, and you see how reasonable this judge is
Mhm.
and how soft spoken, but yet stern and strict, and to both sides. He's trying to take it right down the middle. And I want you to explain this since you are an attorney. The defense has indicated that they're going to produce an alternate, or they leave it open. They're going to produce an alternate suspect. That is easier said than done because if you produce that alternate suspect, you must name him or
Mhm.
her. So that may just be strategic in nature, and they don't really intend to do that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Billy, they could always toward at the end of the trial and closing arguments say, there's and criticize the police and say they didn't review all of the possible suspects that they got tips on. But the judge did admonish her that if you were going to say that and bring up to the jury that you have an alternative theory to the case, when she then, in her case in chief, when she stands up and says, Your Honor, the prosecution has already made their case. Now we, the defense, are going to make our case. That's her case in chief. If she wants to say there's an alternative theory, and there's alternative killer, you're going to say that. The judge said, you better be prepared to name a name. You can't just say it's out, to throw it out there and just leave it hanging. You better say it's a name, say a name, and you better have a good faith reason for giving that name. And that puts her in a strange position because if she does name somebody, Joe Smith from, Idaho is probably the killer. If you say that, you're opening yourself up to like perhaps a defamation lawsuit by that person. So he's telling her up front, if you're going to say that you have an alternative theory and this is probably the killer, you got to name that name to the jury and put it out there and support it with some sort of evidence that this person themselves drives a white Hyundai. This person themselves is a hunter and has a K-bar knife. You just can't, throw that out there. You better build a foundation for that argument, a reasonable person foundation for that argument. So I don't think she's going to go there and in her case in chief. I think probably she's just going to allude to the fact that how many people were not investigated when she does a cross-examination of prosecution witnesses. And perhaps in her closing arguments, she could say that there are probably people out there who were never investigated without naming them. Just throw it out there at the very, very end, say, they never, investigated every possible person. But she has to be careful.
One of the most important things in this case, of course, is the car. The car is usually important because if you recall this case in the very beginning, before there was even a perpetrator named, it was very early on. It was maybe, this occurred on the 13th, it was maybe on the 16th or the 18th, they mentioned a white Hyundai Elantra. And they mentioned it, and what you see on the screen right now is the times on the morning of 11/13/2022 that the white Hyundai Elantra was seen, taken by different video cameras in the vicinity of 1122 King Road. Now, they were looking for this white Hyundai Elantra.
Right.
And at some point, there may have been a nexus to the car and finding a car like that on Washington State University campus by a security guard. I think he found two Hyundai white Elantras. And the one, of course, known as car number one now, belonged to Brian Kohberger. And that is how he became a suspect. And there was no probable cause at that point. He became, I'll use the TV language, a person of interest.
Right.
He became a person of interest. Then they start looking into, where was that car? Was there a car like that on November 13th? Look, you see the times prior to the murders. And it was spotted on different video cameras in the vicinity of 1122 King Road. And when they did more investigation, they were able to spot the car going back on the roads leading back to Washington State University. Thus, we hear the alibi by Ann Taylor in the defense that he likes to go out stargazing and driving around at 4 a.m. when it's 10 degrees below zero and just go look in parks and stargaze. So hard to explain, though, when you connect the dots and the car is in the car. But again, we cannot identify the driver, can we?
No.
So this is, again, and I'll use the word, circumstantial evidence from which inferences are drawn. However, we connect the dots to Washington State University, and this car belongs to one Brian Kohberger. Mike.
And they have Brian Kohberger's white Hyundai leaving Washington University campus, like, an hour or 45 minutes, maybe an hour and a half before they think the murders occurred. And they connect that with the cell tower, indicating that he had turned off his cell phone shortly after leaving the university. And about 5:25 or something like that, I can't remember the exact time, they have video of him entering the University of Washington campus, his car again, and soon after that, his phone comes back on. It's turned back on. So it matches perfectly with, and so that makes it that much more, circumstantially that much more likely that he is the person, he is the suspect. But you're right. In the beginning, they had a few things, and by analyzing it, they put it all together, and circumstantially, they have Brian Kohberger as a suspect, and then you have the touch DNA. But that car alone, even though you don't have a picture, a clear picture, because the security cameras were not, didn't have high resolution pixels, they have the car, and you can tell it's a car that doesn't belong to somebody living in Washington or Oregon, because it only has one license plate. He later on, after the homicides, he then re-registered his car to have 2 license plates when he changed his address. But at the time of the homicides, there was only 1 license plate. And so therefore, if there was any other white Hyundais owned by anybody in that part of Washington or that part of Idaho, they would have had 2 license plates on it. So even though doesn't seem like a lot to a lot of people, it is excellent circumstantial evidence.
AB from the chat, car model is common. There were thousands of white Elantras registered in the area. This doesn't prove it was his. We have said that. And I, ad nauseum, I've been describing what circumstantial evidence is, from which inferences are drawn. And it just so happens that a car like this with 1 license plate that happens to be registered to one Brian Kohberger at Washington State University was seen in the vicinity of 1122 King Road. You can see those times right there. 4:07. That's right before the murders. 4:07 a.m. And you can see other times that it was caught on video cameras. 3:30, 3:35. I can't. It's small. 3:38, 3:40.
Yeah.
Powerful evidence, I think. Powerful circumstantial evidence, right? Which also gives an indication to law enforcement that he was hunting, wasn't he? He was doing a recon. I use the word reconnaissance. He was reconning the crime scene.